Where's John? That's going to be your mic. Test it out right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the Buffalo Bill Center of the West. My name is Eric Rossborough. I am Associate Librarian and Senior Cataloger here at the McCracken Research Library. And I'm very excited about today's guest. He gave a talk last month, which was awesome. If you happen to miss it, you can check it out on YouTube on the Center website. Just go into YouTube and type in Center of the West Bob Richard, and you can learn about his experiences as a horseback ranger. But today, Bob is going to be talking about early trips to Yellowstone run by his grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. Fred Richard, and their partner, Ned Frost and Mary Frost. Let me tell you a little bit about Bob. Bob boasts an unusual array of life experiences. He was a Marine Corps helicopter pilot in Vietnam. He's written several books. He was a Red Cross instructor. Ran the Red Cross instruction program. He started working as a cowboy at age 10 when his parents left him on Trout Peak for the summer with a bag of pancake mix. Shortly after that, he started he started working as a hunting guide at how old? 11? 12, he was guiding hunters. But today, he's going to be talking about Ned Frost and Fred Richard and their early trips into Yellowstone, which is a very fascinating story, and he's also plugging this book, Journey to Yellowstone by Bob Richard. Afterwards, we'd like you all to adjourn to the bookstore. You can buy a copy and get it signed by the man himself. Without further ado, I give you Bob Richard.
They've given me two mics, and I think I'll use the permanent one, and we'll save this for questions that you might have as we go along. That one's turned off. Can everybody hear me all right? Thank you for coming today. It's always a treat to come here and be a part of the museum and their talks. And as I get older, everyone comes to me and says, well, what about this or what about that? And it just makes me feel older, but it's neat to share with you what I learned and I'm still learning about my grandparents and my uncles and aunts. And the Frost and Richard Camping Company did tours in the summertime in Yellowstone Park. And this is called A Journey to Yellowstone. And they started doing these as soon as they opened the east gate to Yellowstone Park. And the photos are by my grandfather, Ned Frost, my dad, and there's a few of mine that are going to be in here too, but they weren't taken at the same time. This is a begging bear back in about 1906, 1908. And this is the cook wagon. And this was probably our most popular cook. My granddad hired him, and he worked for over 30 years for Frost and Richard. His name was Phonograph Jones. He told lots of stories, talked too much, but he was the best cook, and he cooked for up to 150 guests at a time, going through the park for 18 days. But when someone tells you, oh, begging bears started in the 50s, no, it did not. It started way back in the early 1900s or before. Here's a map of Yellowstone. I'm going to have to go to the... Can you hear me all right with this one? All right. This is Cody over here. And the Frost and Richard Ranch, and this is the North Fork going into the East Gate, and these numbers are where they started camping, at the ranch, and before they got to the park, and then up by Sylvan Lake, and they worked their way around, and they made the Grand Loop, and came all the way around, back, went up to Mount Washburn with the guests. They had a camping group and they had the passenger group. Some people paid a little extra so they could ride on horses. And when they got back and got them delivered, it was either 16 or 18 days at the Burlington Cody Inn. This is the forward. These are two of the brochures that they used. And we'll look at more of that as we go along. This is a photograph of my granddad, Fred Richard, after he and I went fishing one day. And we're catching some nice cutthroat trout. This is Fred Richard on the left with his half-hour boots. Notice what they used to wear. And this is Ned Frost, who was his partner and his brother-in-law. And that's a pet bear that my dad actually brought to town with another cub and had in town for a whole day. But that's another story. We'll get to that another day. This is Ned Frost in front of the tents that were set up. They had cots. The rates, $80 a person. If they wanted to go to Jackson Hole, it went up to $140, and it was another 6 days. They could hire saddle horses for $1. Can you read that? And what to wear, luggage, ladies traveling without escorts. Lots of good stories, how they could get communications. And the best thing is they said the roads are entirely of government construction, broad enough for perfect safety, well graded and sprinkled. Sometimes they were sprinkled. This is at the Burlington Railroad Station across the way. And this is a passenger wagon picking the guests up as they got off the train and they went up to stay at the ranch the first night. This is coming into town with another coach. This is the Cody Burlington Inn, or Burlington Cody Inn. And this is the dam hill that was built. And it was named Dam, and my grandmother didn't spell it D-A-M either. But it was a 10% grade, one way, and lots of problems. And if it was in the wintertime, many times we would spend a day or two in town till it melted enough to get up the road. This is the ranch. This photograph was taken in about 1914, the ranch house. Here's all the tents, and they're getting ready to start off on their trip to Yellowstone. This is inside the house. My grandmother here and Aunt Mary here, they were sisters. And my granddad sleeping on the couch. That's a big grizzly bear. This is the house from the outside, and everybody's getting ready to depart to Yellowstone. Can you imagine 18 days sitting in a carriage or a horse? But they loved it. They did a trip the 1st of July. That's when the snow melted enough, or they blasted the snow so they could get through on Sylvan Pass. And then they did one the 1st of August, and they did one the 1st of September. After that, there was too much snow again. This is the cook wagon. This is going up the North Fork. It's called Chimney Rock. This was taken at Libby Creek on the North Fork, and that was their first stop from the ranch, going up the North Fork. And that flat area is still being used by campers and outfitters. This is the east entrance, and Horace Albright was meeting guests here, and that was the gate that everybody went through, and this was taken about 1915. This is the corkscrew bridge, and later on they replaced it with a stone and rock and concrete, but this is the Frost and Richard wagons as they headed up to Yellowstone. Cook wagon down here. And they traveled probably 15 to 18 miles a day. This is a group of school teachers that booked a trip. This is my granddad. He had a broken shoulder. And the young lady here was a school teacher from Chicago, and he taught her to use the reins or the ribbons and drive the two teams. And before the trip is over, they stopped at the Lake Hotel where my granddad asked her to marry him. And the following New Year's Eve, they married in Chicago, and his partner, Ned Frost, was with him. And they moved back, and Granddad and Ned in the wintertime would trap coyotes and wolves. And the next fall, Mary Hughes, my grandmother's sister, came back to help deliver. She was a nurse, my dad. And next thing, she married Ned Frost. So the partners were not only partners, they became brother-in-laws. And most of the people in Cody I'm related to one way or the other because of the big families. But here's a photograph of my grandmother before she became a grandmother to me, and all her school teacher friends on an 18-day trip to Yellowstone. And that's a corkscrew back right over the top of the wagon. This is on about the 30th of June, trying to get over Sylvan Pass through the snow with the cook wagon. This is Sylvan Lake and their camp on Sylvan Lake. And we have all these photographs of Ned Frost and my dad and my granddad showing what it was like. This is on Yellowstone Lake, and my granddad sitting on the horse telling the guests where they were going, told them lots of stories. He was a great storyteller. And these are the different days where they traveled to. And it's interesting to me, I found most of their campsites. This is Old Faithful. Now, this is actually my photograph, but this is my favorite photograph of Old Faithful Geyser in all its glory. Here they are swimming in one of the Nez Perce Creek in the lower geyser basin, and the water was at least 70 degrees. Guests crossing the Gibbon River. This is Obsidian Cliffs. And again, here you have one of the wagons. And then they get to Mammoth. And this was the headquarters for the soldiers. The soldiers ran the park till about 1920. It became the responsibility of the Department of Interior, and the Rangers or the soldiers changed hats and became Rangers. And there's still Rangers there today. This is a petrified tree. There used to be two of them. And they stopped there, and then the wagons with the guests went up on top of Mount Washburn. And that was an extra hard trip for horses to pull up over the top at Washburn. And then the camping gear and wagons just went over Dunraven Pass. These are guests on horseback. This was taken later. I see these two hats, and this is Jack Richard, and that's Bob Richard, his brother, with guests in a later tour. This is Ned Frost catching trout out of the Yellowstone River. Guests again, this is Chew Frost, one of Ned's boys, and my Uncle Bob there. And this young lady was drinking water out of the stream. Everybody could drink the water back in those days before we had Giardia. And Giardia is a bacteria that's gotten into our waters, and you have to boil your water. You don't drink out of the streams. This is the lower falls of the Yellowstone, and right here is a deck that you can hike down to. And this is taken in midsummer. It's 308 feet high. They spent 3 days at the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, and they hiked about 3 miles on the south side and about 4 miles on the north side, and they had their camp at what we called Paradise Glen. And in later years, we had the young today's Prince Monaco here visiting, and I always say he's my older cousin, but he's actually younger, was a deputy sheriff and took the prince through Yellowstone and had lunch at Paradise Glen. This is the camp at Paradise Glen, and people had their cots. And can you imagine cooking and having people sit at tables for 150 guests? They didn't have that many all the time, but in 1913, more guests were with Frost and Richard than all the guests that came into Yellowstone in the other 4 entrances. Again, another shot. This tree finally fell down right here, but it's still part of Paradise Glen. But it just shows you, look at the size of that grizzly bear up there. And you don't want to run into them even today. This is one of the wagons going back, and when they had big groups, they borrowed every wagon in town and every man that could drive a team of horses, and they borrowed every team they could get to take that many people to Yellowstone. Here's the report that they had special licenses, and they had 273 guests that entered through the east entrance. And it shows the costs, special 28-day trips. But can you imagine the logistics? Think about it. If you're riding a bus today and you do a day or two, and I ran bus tours here and guided tours for 37 years. But I thought I had a lot of logistics, but let me tell you, how they dealt with it, I don't know. And their cook had to have been amazing because they brought it all with them for 18 days. And they ate well. This is a story, and this is in the book, about Prince Albert's visit and hunting trip with Frost and Richard. My granddad, because he spoke French when he was growing up, was the one that took Prince Albert hunting for 3 weeks because he could remember his French, and after 3 days, he could speak it fluently again. But quite a story, and that was in 1913. And then I found 3 days before we published this book, the journal of Margaret Hughes, who became my grandmother. And her journal is in the back of the book that's for sale upstairs. But she tells about the snow, she tells about her experience as a school teacher traveling with Fred Richard as a party that went through the park in 1908. This is some of the girls that were with her, and we don't know where Iowa Falls is. I think it's the upper falls of the Yellowstone. And they dropped the term Iowa and call it the Upper Falls today. Black bear, they were always trying to get a bite to eat. And this is my grandmother after she married my granddad, and they were living on the North Fork, and she's shooting a hawk that just killed one of her chickens. My granddad's holding the dead chicken here in the background, Jim Mountain in the Wapata Valley. And they had dogs in those days, along with about 600 head of horses, about 500 head of cows, a bunch of sheep, plus milk cows. But it kept them pretty busy. This is my granddad in his horse short, and he used this as a Christmas card. And it's fun for me to find these and share them, put them in the book. This just tells about some of my other books as a Yellowstone Horse Ranger, Yellowstone Country. This is a book going to Yellowstone between here and the park, showing all the rock formations that were named by the guests. Here's one just on Cody. Here's one for the Beartooth, and there are others that I haven't updated in this. This is one of the brochures of Frost and Richard camping. This is a mountain sheep. Now, these are my photographs, but this is what you see in the fall going up the North Fork or going into Yellowstone. Look at the size of that ram. This is a bull elk in the velvet, and he'll polish those off. In fact, by now they are polished. And that was taken up by Lake Hotel. This is a black bear. Trust me, I took these all out of the window of the car. I was not standing out there shaking hands with them. You should, when you visit Yellowstone today or tomorrow, you should see most of these animals. This is a coyote, but when I'm standing there and guiding people and somebody says, "Oh, look at the wolf," I never say a word because they're going to go home and tell everyone they saw a wolf. Well, why change their mind? I don't want to argue with them, so I just keep my mouth shut and let them call that coyote a wolf. But it's a pretty looking critter. This photograph I have sold over 700 of, and all the retirees in the park that are park rangers or employees of the park get this the day they retire, and they cherish this. And also the Xanterra corporation that has their people retire, they get enlargements of this. But that's probably my most profitable photograph I've taken over the years. I call him King of the Road. I had two guests with me. We were on Sylvan Pass, noticed the snow up here, and they were, my guest said, "Well, stop, let him get on the car." I said, "You gotta be kidding." "Oh no, it'd be fun to see him up there." I said, "No, it wouldn't. I'm backing up with the camera stuck out the window, And about that time, a pickup coming the other direction stopped next to him, and the bear jumped in the back end. And all of a sudden, the guy in the pickup was quite concerned whether the bear was going to come inside with him, but he jumped back out and went on his way. But look at his claws. And those are the difference between a black bear, which are much shorter and smaller, but those can tear apart a cabin, they can tear apart a tree, and that's probably a 6-year-old grizzly. And look at his long nose. This is a bison. We around here sometimes refer to it as a buffalo. He has what we call chaps. And they used to migrate into the park before it was a park, but they didn't winter there because there was 6 feet of snow. Today, we have bison that winter there. We have bison that come out the east gate and winter on the North Fork. But this is a big bull. He weighs about 2,000 pounds, and this is a bachelor bull. He's been beaten out of the herd when he was 10 or 11, when he was a herd bull, and then he lives till he dies as a bachelor bull. And the other bachelor bulls you'll see in the park are alone, and you see them all over because they've been beaten out of the herd and they never return to the herd. The cows weigh about 1,200 pounds, and their calves have turned from the red color that they were born with, and now they are starting to get the winter coat for this winter. This is Frost and Richard in 1910. My granddad and my dad, my grandmother, who lived in the tent, Ned with her new baby lived in the cabin. Notice the blanket over the cow. Here are a couple of the wagons that they used to take people to Yellowstone, and they were out in the Clark's Fork, which is 38 miles north of here, and they wintered there while they trapped coyotes and wolves and what have you. And at the end of that winter, my grandmother and her sister said, "We are not staying in Clark's Fork another winter." This gives you an idea of what it was like. Can you imagine having to, even the dog says that I'm miserable. But they had to do laundry. The men were busy trapping and skinning animals. And these 2 Chicago girls married these old duffers. They weren't old at that time, but that just chills me thinking about it. This is Ned Frost in the 50s. I had the pleasure of taking him on his last elk hunt in the mountains, and we got on a nice bull elk, and he stepped out of the Jeep and he shot offhand and killed the elk immediately. And he says, "Well, I haven't lost my touch." And I says, "No, sir, you haven't." This again is my granddad relaxing. This is Ned with that cub again. This is Aunt Mary. This is the nurse. And she and Ned moved into town, and he had a Studebaker garage. This was about 1917. And she started the Frost Curio store. And it was in the Irma, and then she got a store across the street. But she sold lots of Navajo jewelry, blankets, a lot of Chinese cloisonne, and other things. But she took care of everybody in Cody. Anybody that was in need, she saw to it they were taken care of and looked after. And this was taken in the early 50s. This is Ned Frost up on Cedar Mountain, and of course I can't tell it all today, but this is where Buffalo Bill said he wanted to be buried, and I tell the story of how he is buried up there, and people from Denver just really argue with me about that, but they don't know the true story. Anyway, That's Jim Mountain in the background, and the sign has disappeared. Somebody got away with it. This is my granddad on his retirement home on Logan Creek. That's Cedar Mountain where that sign was. And I got a helicopter, a Hiller 12E in Grable, rented it, came up, and I said, Granddad, I want to take you and grandmother on a flight of the Yellowstone area. And my grandmother says, I'm not getting in that thing. So Granddad says, okay, I'll go with you. And we flew this whole area that he hunted, guided people, all of Yellowstone, came back, and he says, wow. He says, I have seen everything now. And he said to do that, what took a lifetime to ride a horse, to hunt, fish, and share with people from all over the world, and in 2 hours you take me around and show it to me. He says, what else are they going to think of? And he insisted that I come in and have a drink with him. And I said, I shouldn't do that, but I said, I will. So we sat, and he sat in his easy chair and talked story, and then we flew back to Grable. Well, the man that rented me the helicopter had hunted on the ranch, knew Granddad. He wouldn't let me pay for the use of the helicopter, and then he took us to dinner. But we made one major mistake. We forgot to call grandmother and tell her we were going to dinner. And let me tell you, when we got home at 11 o'clock last night, she was beside herself because she knew we'd crashed, burned, and died. But we'd had a great day, I'll tell you. And what a great memory for me. But I thought that it was a real treat for me to share with my granddad his way of life from the time that I was growing up. And he'd let me drive the pickup to Yellowstone at the age of 10, as long as I remembered every stream, every mountain, and every rock formation. If I missed, then I had to sit between he and my grandmother, and he'd light up the worst, ugliest, big fat cigars that gag anybody. And so I really tried to learn all the streams and the mountains and what have you. And I didn't know why till I came back out of the service and started a guide and tour business. But anyway, thank you for watching. I'll be upstairs in a few minutes to sign books if you're interested. But how about some questions first? And hold on here. Eric's going to bring you the mic. No, we need to get you on the recording.
Just a quick question, thank you. I was wondering, you mentioned the first stop outside of the East Gate was Lily Creek.
Libby
Creek, okay,
Yes.
where's Libby Creek from Eagle Creek?
Okay, it's further to the east. Libby Creek is where Home Lodge is. They now call it Cross Sabers.
Okay.
And there are horse corrals there that are the jumping off point for Eagle Creek. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. I bet there's someone else. There's no, yes, sir.
Hi, Bob. Just curious. It looked to me like your parents' place out there on the North Fork, is that now known as the Rand Creek Ranch?
Well, no, the Rand Creek Ranch was just to the east of the Frost and Richard Ranch. Everything from Green Creek to Rand Creek was the Frost and Richard Ranch,
Okay.
which is now thought of as Copperleaf, and that was part of it. And Ned and Fred bought that in 1912, built a house, and then they ran it together till 1917 when Ned and Mary moved to town. My granddad called it the Fred Richard Ranch till 1935, and he had 2 boys in college, and he couldn't do the payments on the ranch, and keep the boys in college. So he turned the ranch back to Ned Frost, who had 3 sons, and he moved out to the Diamond Bar Ranch and was the ranch manager for Kid Nichols on the South Fork through the 40s. In fact, that'll be another story and another trip, but
Thank you very much.
does that answer your question?
Yes, sir.
And the ranch on Rand Creek was the Hollister Ranch, and he was a lawyer in town, and that house is still there. And if you can get a tour of it, their fireplace is built so that they could pull curtains and you could stay warm while the rest of the house was ice cold. But it's still there. Another question? Oh, I can tell we've got,
Just to clarify, when you go up the North Fork, Copperleaf is down on the right,
yes,
and when you look to the left where the princes live, right, correct? You
yes,
can see the old stone from the ranch.
The rock.
foundation. That's where the ranch house was. Does that help? I'm just helping you, Bob. Thank you.
Oh.
You're welcome.
you know, you're welcome to come up here and bring that cousin of mine. He's a good talker. He's a good storyteller. Anyway, the questions are coming from Bev Richard, and she joined our family and straightened out my younger cousin and got him on the right track, and he's been a good boy ever since. But you're welcome. And their son Scott is here. He's a realtor here in town. And I'm glad you're all here today. Yes.
Bob, my question is more about the roughing it part. So when they were doing the tours, what kind of food did they bring, and how did y'all keep it for 18 days? And where do the people go to the restroom at and things like that?
Well, the restroom, trust me, when I was doing tours, I knew where every vault toilet was. But in those days, there were no vault toilets. But they dug holes and they put a tent up, and they had a wooden seat and a collapsible thing with hinges so that people could sit and go to the bathroom. But if they were traveling during that 17 miles, I'm sure that Granddad or Uncle Ned or whoever was leading the trip would say, "There's a tree." And even I, when I did tours, would say, "Let me know ahead of time if you need a bathroom. Otherwise, there's a tree or there's a bush." And it's still that way. Of course, if you're on a bus, you have the blue room in the back, but that's awful, I'll tell you. So, and most of the buses will stop at one of the hotels where you have a nice warm bathroom today. But I ran bus tours in Yellowstone also and stepped on about 60 buses a summer for a lot of years with my guides. And I have a couple of my guides that have worked for me over the years that are here today. And so I have to keep everything honest. I can't tell too many stories today. All right, any other questions? Yes, sir.
When did helicopter service first begin in Yellowstone?
Well, to my knowledge, there isn't any today. There are people that rent helicopters or rent tours or do tours for people, but they have lots of restrictions on them. And I get very upset when I see somebody fly over Old Faithful when it's erupting, because it ruins my photograph. And I make it a point to get their number and turn them in. But they have to be above 5,000 feet. And there are people that work out of Cody and West Yellowstone that do tours, also out of Bozeman. I haven't kept up with it, but it's a great way to see the park or to fly. And if you can get a tour to say, I want to go to West Yellowstone and back, then you can dip a wing and try and catch Old Faithful or look at some of the other sites that are up there. And I've taken numerous trips by airplane and done photography. Does that answer your question? Yes, sir.
This is a repeat of a question. How did they stock and keep fresh and edible all of the food for 18 days?
Well, they, I'm sure, took a lot of hams, a lot of cured meat. They started out with fresh meat the first few days. I don't know how they did it. I really don't. But they packed it in the bottom of the wagon and kept it as cool as they could for as long as they could. But it took a real cook to figure out how to feed whatever size group you had, how you kept it cold, lots of canned goods. And the canned goods of those days were not like they are today. And they were questionable, but I think they had some, I'm sure they served a lot of beans, and I'm sure they served other dried foods and soaked them. But I wasn't there, and I have searched for their list of food supplies. I haven't found them yet, but I'm still looking. And as family members sell their homes, they're sharing with me all the correspondence and what have you between family members. But if I find it, trust me, I will publish it. Thank you for the question. Anyone else? Well, it's 1:15. I was supposed to be through by that time. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being a part of today.
And we'll see you upstairs in the bookstore where you can get your own personal autographed copy of Journey to Yellowstone by Bob Richard.
Yes, sir.
And thank you for your service.
Well, thank you.
Are you still on for next month?
Oh, yes.